The following is a summary of the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Toldos Tofshin Nun. Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram hoiled es Yitzchak. Says Rashi, what does Toldos mean? Yaakov ve'esav ho'amurim beparsha. That when it says the word Toldos literally means the children, Yaakov and Esav, who are spoken about in the parsha, even though they are not born yet, and only in the beginning of this parsha are they born, and their life of Yaakov and Esav are discussed later in the Sedra. Nevertheless, when it says Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram, it refers to the Toldos of Yaakov and Esav. This is how Rashi translates. However, what we need to understand is there is an alternative way of translating the word Toldos. Toldos can mean Me'oros, the happenings, the life experiences and story of. And in this case, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram, it's possible to translate the word Toldos as these are the life experiences, the life story of Yitzchak ben Avram. Why did Rashi choose to translate Toldos literally as his children, Yaakov and Esav, even though they're only mentioned later? In fact, in a different place, it says, Eila Toldos Yaakov, and Rashi there does say, Eila Yeshuveim Megilguleim. These are the life, if you want, the life happenings, the Mo'erois of Yaakov. So why doesn't Rashi choose to do and to translate the same over here? There is a medrash that says, wherever the Torah says the word Ve'ela with the addition of a Vav, it comes to add on to what was said previously. And where it just says the word Eila, it comes to interrupt and start a new subject, invalidating or ignoring what was said previously. Now, surely over here, it's more appropriate to translate the word Toldos as life happenings, because the previous Sedras have been spoken about the Akedah of Yitzchak, the marriage of Yitzchak, and so Ve'ela Toldos should add on to what was being said beforehand, and it should carry on with the life story of Yitzchak. If you say Ve'ela actually goes literally on the last subject in last week's parsha, which was the enumeration of the children of Yishmael. In other words, it's saying, these were the children of Yisrael, Ve'ela, and to add on, these are the children of Yitzchak. That's difficult, because the Bnei Yishmael were Rishayim. How could we say that Ve'ela, and Rashi says Yaakov ve'esav, how can we say that Ve'ela, which comes to add on to what was said beforehand, goes on Yaakov? In fact, the Medrash itself touches on this, and it says, for that reason, when it says Ve'ela Toldos, the word Toldos is written choser, without a vav, to come to tell you that Yaakov should not be included amongst the Rishoim of the wicked of the Bnei Yishmael. However, since Rashi does not bring that medrash, and the reason is because it's difficult to say that the principal Toldos of Yitzchak were Esav, therefore, what is the dimyon, what is the comparison of Yaakov to the Bnei Yishmael? Rashi should therefore have translated Toldos as Me'oros, as life happenings. In short, why does Rashi choose and prefer to translate Toldos as literally going on the children, Yaakov and Esav? Why doesn't he just translate Toldos as Me'oros, as happenings, life experiences of? The answer is, Rashi feels that it's absolutely necessary to translate the word Toldos, since we're directly coming from the previous parsha of the Toldos of Yishmael. However, the connection between the Toldos of Yishmael and the Toldos of Yitzchak with a Vav, ve'ela, is not coming to tell you that there is some comparison between the children of Yitzchak and the children of Yishmael. Rather, it's coming to tell you that just as Yishmael was the son of Avram, and here are his progeny, so too over here, Ve'ela told us Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avram hoiledes Yitzchak, that these progeny, which we're going to talk about in this Sedra, are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. In other words, we're talking in relation to Avraham. What's the connection with Avram over here? Because by Avram it says, Av hamoin goyim nesaticha, that Hashem was going to make him a father of many nations. Nevertheless, it says, Ki b'Yitzchak yikara l'chazara, that his principal seed will be through Yitzchak. In other words, the promise of Av hamoin goyim, of becoming a father of a multitude of nations, will not be fulfilled through Yishmael, but it will be fulfilled through Yitzchak, and in fact, it was fulfilled through Yitzchak having Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov and Esav, the great nations of Yisrael and Edom, would come specifically through Yitzchak, and Ve'ela told us means that although Yishmael had Eser Shneimos and Nesiim, he had 12 princes and much progeny, but nevertheless the principal promise of Av Hamoin Goyim, of a multitude of nations, would come through Yitzchak. And it would come through Yaakov and Esav, and through Yaakov and Esav, it would be fulfilled that Avram hoiledes Yitzchak. In other words, the bracha of Av Hamoin Goyim will be fulfilled specifically through Yitzchak and specifically through Yaakov and Esav, who are Murim B'Parsha. One may add on to this from the perspective of Yeina Shel Torah, Pnimius HaTorah, the inner dimension of the Torah. The Tzemach Tzedek in Oyer HaTorah brings a Pirush, Ve'ela told us, and he translates as follows. Ve'ela shemoisif umarchiv gevul hagdusha, that Yitzchak expands the borders of holiness, al yidei hoitzoas ubirur hanitzutzes dikdusha min haklipa, through the extraction, refining, and elevation of sparks of holiness from klipa. Umayla oisan lehikolo bikdusha, elevating them so that they will be enveloped within kedusha. V'zeu masha pirush Rashi, and that's what Rashi says. Ve'ela told us Yaakov ve'esav ha'amurim beparsha, which means that Yaakov, he refines Esav, and he elevates all the sparks of holiness within Esav, and thereby he expands the borders of holiness. This is why Rashi, in fact, puts Yaakov before Esav. He says, Yaakov ve'esav ha'amurim beparsha. Why? Because the additional kedusha comes through Yaakov refining Esav, until he elevates Esav to his root and source, which is ha'amurim beparsha, as Esav is in the Torah. In other words, not as Esav actually rolled out in real life, but in his source as he is in the Torah, in his root and in his source in holiness. Yaakov reveals that by elevating and refining Esav. And therefore, we can now actually join together the two Pirushim, the two translations in the word told us. One was told us literally children Yaakov and Esav, and the other was the life story of Yitzchak. Because the principle and complete avodah of Yitzchak started with the birth of his children. Yitzchak was 40 years old when he married Rivka. He was 60 years old when Yaakov and Esav were born. It's obvious that during those first 40 years, and also in the 20 years after he married Rivka, there were many, many happenings that happened to Yitzchak in his life, especially that of the Akedah, and it's also brought in Midrash, an unbelievable thing, that after the Akedah, he spent 3 years in Gan Eden. And thereafter, he married Rivka. Nevertheless, the Iker, the principle, and the complete avodah of Yitzchak only starts after he has Yaakov and Esav. The Toldos starts after Yaakov and Esav, Amurim B'Parsha. Why is that? Because the Tachlis HaKavana, the ultimate intent, is not Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, like in the story of the Akedah, nor is it to climb into Gan Eden as he did after the Akedah. Rather, the principal Avodah has to be down here in this world, refining the world, creating a Dira B'Tachtonim, an abode for Hashem in this world. And that starts principally when Yaakov and Esav are born, Peru Uravu, when he's being fruitful and multiplying, Yaakov expressing the idea of Aseh Tov, positivity and holiness, and Esav expressing the idea of Sur Meirah, of turning away from evil. And in the refining of Esav through Yaakov, we have the continuation of the Parshias in Vayetze, in Yaakov going down to Lavan, being involved in the Avodas HaBirurim, in the refining of Lavan and his sheep, and thereafter Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, coming to refine Esav. And therefore the word ve'ela, which comes to add onto what was said previously, comes to tell you that the Iker Avodas Yitzchak was not what happened to him, the Me'oros, previously in his life, but rather what principally is important about Yitzchak was the birur of Yishmael in the previous Sedra, ve'ela, and the further birur, the further refining and elevation of Esav through Yaakov. The Tzemach Tzedek continues and says that Yitzchak was 40 years old when he married Rivka and 60 years old when he had Yaakov and Esav. Why 40 years old? The number 40 is Ben Arboim Lebina, means he's reached the level of understanding. A person only understands the teachings of their master after 40 years. And it says both the letters Mem and Samach are rooted in the Sephira of Bina, and the Koyach Haleda, the power of birth, of giving birth to Yaakov and Esav, came from a Koyach Elyon, a very great power from Bina, which resulted in the birth of Yaakov and Esav. In fact, we find an interesting thing about the letters Mem and Samach. The Gemara says, in the Luchais, Benes Hoyu Oimdim, since one was square, the Mem, and one was round, the Samach, therefore, since the Luchas were engraved from one side to the other, the middle bit didn't fall out. It was a miracle that it didn't fall out. This is the idea of an avodah b'derech nes, and it starts a seder chodosh, a new order, in that the avodah in the world has to be through tzchoik v'tanug, laughter and pleasure, as hinted to in the name of Yitzchak, and that happens through the transformation of darkness into light and bitter into sweet, which will come to its complete fruition, le'osid lavi, in time to come, where the principle then of the Avos will be Yitzchak ki ata avinu, because of the tremendous delight and tainuk which Yitzchak, which Klal Yisrael will achieve through the transformation of in the long golus of darkness into light and bitterness into sweet. All of the above said has great relevance to our generation. Being the last generation of golus, of exile, and the first generation of Geula, there is an emphasis on our avodah in this generation, that it also should be to have a influence on the Umas Ha'olam, on the nations of the world, in all matters of tzedek v'yosher, righteousness, which starts with the keeping of the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. This is emphasized in the avodah of the Nasi Hador, the leader of the generation. The Frierdiker Rebbe's name, his second name was Yitzchak, because the chidush, the novelty in his avodah was spreading Yiddishkeit throughout the entire world, including the half Chatzi Kader Atachton, the Americas, and to the entire world by translating Chassidus into 70 languages, and especially in the year Tafshin Nun, when this Sicha was said, which is the Shnas Ho'arboim, the 40th year after Tafshin Yud, 1990 after 1950, when there needs to be a Hosafa, an addition in all the above matters, B'derech Neis, as it says, Tehishnas Nisim, a year of Nisim. This is all connected with the Kinus HaShluchim Ho'ilami of 1990, because the Shluchim are the representatives of all the lands in the world, and in fact of all the people in the world. All the Bnei Yisrael, every single Yid is a shliach of Hashem to create an abode for Hashem down in this world. Yidden need to create the dira through Tariag mitzvahs, through keeping 613 mitzvahs. Gentiles need to create that abode through keeping their 7 mitzvahs. And each echelon of the world, be it mineral, vegetable, or animal, needs to create that dira by being used. Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamai, everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in the world, lo barai elech l'chveidei, he created only for his glory. So when it's used properly, that makes it a vehicle to the dwelling for Hashem. This shlichus can sometimes be slightly concealed. However, it is the job and mission of the shluchim to reveal in every level and in every echelon, whether it be mineral, vegetable, animal, human, by Yidden through Tariag mitzvahs, through Lahavdil Goyim, by Sheva mitzvahs, their tafkid in the world, which is Lo broi ela l'chvoidei, to create the dira lo yisbarach. And the whole purpose and content of the kinus is that from many shluchim, they coalesce into one kinus with a focus on fulfilling the shlichus which Hashem has given them in the creation of a dira lo yisbarach. And consequently, ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram, Yaakov ve'Esav ho'amurim beparsha, that their goal is to refine Esav through Tainug and Schaik, and for sure, whatever has been achieved at this kinus will continue in further kinusim, local kinusim in various lands, and even from those kinusim, they should also publish a special book, Zeh Sicha Toldos HaKinus, of each land, in which will express the kinus of that particular land. The birur, the refining of the world, is not just spoken about in the parsha, but it's also seen clearly in the world itself. There are those who ask the following question: how can we possibly say that now we're standing at the end of Golus? Seemingly the world is just continuing to operate as it always did. It's astonishing that people ask this question and they don't think very carefully about what is actually happening in the unbelievable revolutions that are taking place in the world, but in a way of tranquility, without any wars, without great bloodshed. And it's through political maneuvering rather than by physical warring. Starting off with Russia, after a period of 70 years of a government which extremely controlling government, so much so that if somebody made one step wrong, they would get sent off to Siberia and so on and so forth. Now there's been a tremendous change almost from one extreme to the other, but it's been without major revolutions as was happened in the past, and it's been done in a tranquil way. Similarly, China's the same, certainly in their relationship with other nations in the world. So too with India. These places have billions of people inside them. It could have happened in such a warring and life-costing way, and yet it's happened in a life-saving way, in a miraculous way, in which the revolutions that have taken place in these countries have happened b'sheket or b'menucha, tranquil and calm, without bloodshed. Unlike, for example, as happened in the Second World War, Leisokum Pa'amayim Sora, such a thing should never happen again. And now, b'chaste Hashem, with the kindness of Hashem, without wars, and in a tranquil way, these revolutions are happening. And even natural disasters, such as the earthquakes, which have been seen this year, also didn't cost tremendous human life as previously. The connection with Bnei Yisrael is that their learning Torah and fulfillment of mitzvahs, number one, through thinking about the happenings in the world, it will add in their recognition of Gadlus Hashem, of the greatness of Hashem. In addition to Hashem's Hanhogas HaTeva, running nature, one can see an Hanhoga Nisis, a miraculous conduct over here, that is only within the power of Hashem to be able to pull off, that there's such transitions and revolutions going on in a calm and peaceful way. And secondly, it adds, in fact, to the Emunah in Bias HaMashiach, because these revolutions are a siman, a sign of the Mashiach's coming. As it says, one of the signs is Malchias Miskoros Zul Bezu, that nations will vie with each other, but not in a bloodshed way, but here in a way that will create world revolutions in a tranquil way. All of this stems from and is a result of the avodah of Yidden, as it says, Yatsev Gevulos Amim Lemispar Bnei Yisrael, that Hashem sets the borders of nations according to the Bnei Yisrael. And therefore, when Yidden will add in Limud HaTorah and in Kiyum HaMitzvahs and in Birur HaOlam, which includes also having an a influence on the nations of the world through asking them to fulfill the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, that has an effect that automatically, without too much involvement and without too much thought, that causes the nations of the world to be transformed in a very positive and tranquil way. And what's happening recently in the world is a direct result of the recent avodah of the Bnei Yisrael in the world. And therefore, it is the hope that this Kinus Hashluchim will have the desired effect on the world. And the Rebbe finishes the Sicha by saying, V'yehi rotzein, v'hu ha'ikar, this is the main thing, sheyitoyse v'yidyoyse ba'avidosim shel Yisrael, that the Yidden should have more avodah, u'b'meili yitoyse v'yidyoyse b'hatavas matzah v'olam kulei. And the greater the avodah by Yidden, the greater the situation of tranquility will there be in the world. B'chesed u'berachimim, with kindness and with mercy, b'tov hanir v'hanigla, in a good, revealed and open way. Al yidei chizuk v'hisyatzus b'mishtar ha'amiti shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by enforcing the true law and order of Hashem, Boirei Olam HaManhiga, the creator of the world and the one who conducts the world. Until V'hoisal Hashem Mamlucha, the whole world will recognize the Malchus, the kingship of Hashem in the world, U'malahar es deis Hashem, Kamayim Layom Achasim, and the world will be full of the knowledge of Hashem, like the waters cover the sea.